Machst du? I can't hear you. Are you on mute? Can't hear you.
I'm not on mute anymore.
Perfect.
Hashem, how are you?
Well, Hashan, I still have a couple of minutes of prep work that I still want to do, but I wanted to sign in to allow anybody else who wanted to come in to join. Entertain the people. Oh, I see people are here. David's here. Wonderful. Noam's here. Wonderful. Noam, shalom uvracha, mani shma tzadik. Jerome is here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Oh, the Schottenstein Meister himself has arrived. Good to see you. Let me see how I can see you. Hi, David. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started shortly. We have about 13 minutes before we get started.
All right, sounds great.
Oh, hello, the father of Aryeh. Good to see you. Mr. Schottenstein, great to see you. It's been a few years, but I remember very vividly the delicious food in your home on Shabbos. Thank you for joining us. Hey, Steve. Good to see your beautiful face, Steve. I'm going to get back on in just a minute. I just have another couple of things that I'm doing before we get started. Rabbi Perlstein, please keep the crowd entertained. It's your job. Noam, mwah, kef lirot otcha.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
אני שומע, אני צריך כמה דקות לעבוד קצת. נדבר
אוקיי,
עוד.
כן, אני פה.
מצוין. תודה, תודה.
בכיף. בכיף. Let's put mute.
Okay. Malka, nice to see you. I'd love to see your face.
You do? Okay. How about the rest of the family? Are we?
I'd
Thank
love
you.
to see the whole family. Please invite everyone to come around. We'd love to see everyone.
Okay.
We are going to be starting in about 8 minutes. We will be starting promptly on time in 8 minutes. Please grab for yourself an iced tea, something relaxing to drink.
L'chaim.
L'chaim, Malka. A glass of wine always works. We will be starting shortly.
Okay. I'm here. I'm going to take it off video, but I'm here listening until we get going.
Mitsuyan.
Thank you.
Lady, Fred, mommy, helfen da rein, kannst du da? Mommy will do helfen. Fred bij mommy. Machen wir noch ein bisschen Betty? Oh, was wir davon vermachen? Tati geht bald anfangen an event, okay?
Tati,
Yes.
wir gaan weer op een game.
Ich bin inmitten Zoom-Meeting, jetzt ist nicht Zeit für them, okay? Nachi, wenn Tati sagt, jetzt ist nicht Zeit, ist nicht Zeit. Bitte leg sich, thank you. Hello, Yehoshua. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you. A blast from the past. I can't hear you. Turn on your mic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great to see you.
It's very special. It reminds me of the good old days, sitting and Harving in Morristown. Those were good times.
That's right. Yeah, way back.
Yeah.
David
starting-
also learned in Morristown for a little bit.
Who?
David Kaplan spent some times in Morristown also.
Really? I did not know that. What years was that, David?
It's about 10 years ago, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I've been here for almost 13 years now. So I studied over there just before I moved here. I studied for 3 years over there. 1 year as a bacher in Tomche, and then 2 years in Tiferes. Very special. Had a very, very special time there.
David actually wrote a series of poems about the experience in Tiferes.
Really?
Yes.
I think Aryeh Schottenstein sent me some of those today. I have not had a chance to read them. There was something about a mikvah. I just saw the first line over there, and I was like, I got to read this, but not this minute. Very good. Steve, I hope you're not planning on hiding tonight. We would love to see your beautiful face. Ah, what a face. What a
Hi,
face.
Steve.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're starting in just a few minutes. AY, I'm sending you a quick email. Take a look at it so you can just get a sense as to what I have planned.
Salman, you sent it already?
One sec. Sent. We will be starting in just 1 minute. Going live on Facebook. If you are on Facebook, please let us know that you are seeing this by saying hello, letting us know where you're tuning in from. We would love to just be sure that the Facebook is working as this is going on. We'll give it just 30 seconds to make sure that everything is working. If you are joining us live on Facebook, please let us know by just saying hello or informing us where you're tuning in from. We want to be sure that this is all being recorded for posterity. Okay. I think we are good to go. Welcome and thank you all so very much for joining us for today's Zoom presentation with award-winning poets and authors Yehoshua November and David Kaplan. The event this evening is titled Jewish Poetry. My name is Rabbi Zalman Mendelson and I serve as the co-director of the Chabad Jewish Center of Wyoming together with my wife Razy. It is wonderful to see many familiar faces, and it is my great pleasure to welcome those of you who are joining us for the very first time. Our mission at Chabad is to share the beauty of Jewish tradition, history, education, and Torah with the Jewish community and beyond. Most importantly, during these challenging times, we know that these Zoom presentations are a form of community gathering and are particularly important in bringing us all together. Tonight, we are fortunate to have with us two great Chabads that are joining us on this event. my dear and esteemed colleague, Rabbi Avram Perlstein from Chabad in Salem, Oregon, and to my south, my dear friend and talented colleague, Rabbi Mendy Cohen of Chabad in St. George and Southern Utah. Please give your attention for a moment to Rabbi Cohen, who will help us begin this evening with greetings and a brief Torah thought. Rabbi Cohen, please come on mic.
Hello, everybody. First of all, welcome. It's beautiful to see Jews from all over getting together. It's really nice to have that unity between different communities. Hi, everybody. My name is Rabbi Mendy Cohen of Chabad of St. George. So just a little thought, we speak about tonight's event is about Jewish poetry. And it's actually interesting. If you think about it, Jewish poetry dates back to the time of King David, 970 BCE, many years ago. And that, if you think about it, is the ultimate Jewish poetry that there is when King David put together the book of Psalms. He wrote it, and it's something which is really beautiful. And if you read it, it's actually very interesting. And it's actually speaking about the book of Psalms, it's actually very connected to prayer. Psalms is very, very, it's all about prayer. When you want to connect to God, when there's something going on in your family, in your life, you turn to Tehillim, and that's a form of prayer. And it's interesting, we speak about prayer. Prayer is a very vital part in Judaism. Prayer is a very powerful tool, and prayer is a very important part of being a Jew. If you think about it, when someone prays that they want to be able to, have food for the table, have a good, have a nice business, successful business, healthy family. So the question is, God knows everything, and God knows exactly what you need. So why pray? God knows you, knows your situation, knows all the good that you're supposed to have. So why would God want us to pray? It doesn't really make sense if God knows everything. So just to keep it short, the answer to that question is that when we are praying to God, we're not telling God, you decided one thing, I'm trying to change your mind. That's not what we're doing. When we pray to God, what we're doing is we're telling God, I'm connecting to you, I'm refining who I am, and by changing who I am and becoming a better person and becoming closer to God, now I'm a new person, and now God gives that new person something which was not destined beforehand, and now will be destined now. So that's why on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we pray. And it's something, a very important lesson for our lives is that every time we have situations in our life, a lot of times we could throw our hands up and say, you don't know what to do, and it can be very difficult. The idea is that we always have to remember that the idea of prayer is about looking at ourselves and how could I become more spiritual, more refined, what more good deed I can do to make a difference. And by doing that, you're beseeching God in prayer, which is the idea of Tehillim, of basically connecting to God and doing what we have to do. And that's to a certain extent something to do with what we're talking about tonight, the idea of just making ourselves better wherever we can, in a way that's inspirational, in a way that's meaningful, and in a way that we all can relate to on everyone's level. So that's one of the ideas of poetry which I thought of. And yeah, this is something very beautiful. I'm sure we'd like to hear from Yeshua and David more about Jewish poetry and how you bring that into that world. And that's what it's all about. So l'chaim.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohen, very much for those beautiful words. And I guess to bring the idea home, for those of you who don't yet have a chance to put on tefillin and pray in the morning, or didn't yet have a chance to say the Shema in the evening before you go to bed, consider making that a routine, a part of your life that will enhance your connection to God, to your soul, to your purpose. You'll find great meaning in it. A few housekeeping items before we begin our interview with poets and authors Yehoshua November and David Kaplan. First, I'd like to thank Aryeh Schottenstein for suggesting that we host this event. If you who are on this Zoom presentation have any ideas that you can think of that could turn into a nice Zoom presentation, please let me know. Shoot the idea my way, we'll make it happen. Second, I want to share with you an upcoming event. Please mark your calendars. This upcoming Sunday, July 5th at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, we're doing an event titled Doing Life with Mandela, My Prisoner, My Friend, with Christo Brand, Nelson Mandela's prison guard and friend. The schedule this evening will begin with a poetry reading from each of our esteemed guests of honor, Yehoshua November and David Kaplan. Then, my dear colleague and friend, Rabbi Perlstein from Chabad in Salem, Oregon, will conduct an interview with our poets, followed by more powerful poetry readings. Please send in all of your questions that you have during the discussion so we can incorporate your questions into this evening's dialogue. As you all know, many in the Jewish community today are struggling now during these uncertain times. Please consider making a one-time tax-deductible contribution to either our Chabad in Wyoming, to the Chabad in Salem, Oregon, or to the Chabad in Southern Utah. Visit our websites, find the donate link, and make a one-time generous contribution so we can continue to support our communities during these very challenging times. Okay, let's get started. Yehoshua November is the author of 2 poetry collections, God's Optimism, which was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in Poetry, and 2 Worlds Exist, a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award and the Patterson Poetry Prize. His work has been featured in the New York Times Magazine, Harvard Divinity Bulletin, The Sun, Virginia Quarterly Review, and National Public Radio. Yehoshua November teaches writing at Rutgers University and Touro College. Please put your hands together for Yehoshua. And our next esteemed guest is David Kaplan. He is the author of 6 books of literary criticism and poetry. Most recently, the collection Into My Garden, which depicts life inside out of a Hasidic yeshiva. Maureen N. McLean praised the poems as, quote, a searing, shimmering lucidity among its many offerings. David Kaplan's Into My Garden delicately, precisely, unforgettably tracks the fear and love informing Jewish study and longing. Stephanie Bird observed, these remarkable poems blend spiritual unease with religious confidence, an investigator's fascinated spirit with a sense that the poet has almost, but not quite, come home. The Charles M. Weiss Professor of English at Ohio Wesleyan University, Kaplan twice served as a Fulbright lecturer in American literature and received the Virginia Quarterly Review's Emily Clark Balch Prize for Poetry and an Individual Excellence Award in Criticism from the Ohio Arts Council. Please put your hands together for David Kaplan. We are now going to ask Yehoshua November to begin with reading some of his poetry, followed by David Kaplan. After the readings are done, Rabbi Perlstein from Chabad in Salem will take over and conduct this evening's interview. Yehoshua, please come on mic. We would love to hear from you.
All right, thanks so much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll start just with one poem. This poem is called Baal Tshuva's at the Mikveh. And a Baal Tshuva is an individual who didn't necessarily grow up within a Jewish religious framework and adopted a life of Jewish observance later on, perhaps. It literally means a master of repentance. And the mikveh is a ritual bath, and particularly in Hasidic communities, as a kind of spiritual preparation for morning prayers, men immerse in the mikveh. So this is a kind of like a scene in a men's mikveh. I always say, if you're having trouble imagining the scene, you could just kind of think about a men's locker room, except that everybody's nobody's in good shape because it's always just learning Talmud all day. So that's the kind of image. And the final piece of background is that in Jewish tradition, a person is supposed to avoid getting a tattoo. So you have these young men who have these tattoos from their earlier life, and now they find themselves in the context of the Hasidic yeshiva in the mikveh. So it's called Balchuvas at the mikveh. Sometimes you see them in the dressing area of the ritual bath. Young bearded men unbuttoning their white shirts, slipping out of their black trousers, until, standing entirely naked, they are betrayed by the tattoos of their past life. A ring of fire climbing up a leg, an eagle whose feathery wingspan spreads the width of the chest, or worse, the scripted name of a woman other than one's wife. Then, holding only a towel, they begin once more the walk past the others in the dressing room. The rabbi they will soon sit before in Talmud class. Men with the last names of the first Hasidic families. Almost everyone devout since birth. And with each step, they curse the poverty that keeps the dark ink etched in their skin, until finally they descend the stairs of the purifying water, and beneath the translucent liquid appear once again like the next man, who, in all his days, has probably never made a sacrifice as endearing to God. Thanks. Is David going to read a poem now?
Oh, okay.
You should read a
That
poem.
was
Your bio was
fantastic.
very long.
Sorry, I couldn't get myself off of unmute. That was phenomenal. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
David, please go ahead. What a start. What a great way to start. David, please go ahead and let's continue these powerful, creative thoughts.
Well, thank you very much for having me. First, can everyone hear me? Is the connection okay? I'll read a short poem. It actually mentions, funnily enough, a tattoo also. It begins with it mentions a line in the Gemara, which when the thief prays for success. In Hasidic philosophy, spend some time thinking about this, is why, if the thief believes in God, why is he stealing? And if he doesn't believe in God, why is he praying? And this is partly, I think, it's a short poem about trying to internalize the faith that you have. And it's set, like several of these poems, at a Chabad yeshiva in Morristown, New Jersey, where I spent some time. And a lot of these poems follow someone who's like me and unlike me. It's called Even the Thief. A night of snow no one expected. This late, the study hall sounds different. The same words said again, dark and glowing. A window scratched with its own mistakes. Everyone knows God controls the universe. My study partner translates without a pause. Even the thief prays for success. To know what you feel, not what you ought to feel. Is there anything harder? At the airport, a man with the book of Genesis tattooed down his leg boarded in front of me. And I couldn't help but wonder how it would feel to have those words that close. Thank you.
All right, very nice. Thank you very much, David and Yoshua. My name is Rabbi Perlstein. As my good friend Rabbi Zalman has shared already, I run the Chabad in Salem, Oregon. He's not an Oregonian, so he says Oregon. We'll train him one day to say it correctly, but that's all right. All right, so we absolutely want to hear more, and there seems to be a lot of depth in your poetry about the journeys that you both have taken and others coming to Judaism have taken. So it's fascinating. By the way, we just spoke about tattoos. Have you seen the one that went around Walmart? There was a picture from two yeshiva boys who were shopping in Walmart, and they found a guy with a tattoo in Hebrew, and they asked him what it says, and he says, it says strength, and it said matzah. Either way. All right. So moving on from tattoos, I'm going to pose a question, and then if you guys can each take a moment to share reflection a bit about answering the question, and then when each of you have that chance, we'll move on to another piece of poetry. So first, when did you discover your love for poetry, and how did you get into this? Either David or Yoshua, either one of you can start.
David, you want to start?
Okay. Yeah, I actually started enjoying it quite early, probably in junior high school. I read poems. I don't think I understood them, but I was moved by them. I felt it was a very powerful experience of language. And I think that experience has stayed with me. Even now, there's some poems that I'll find incredibly moving, even when I'm not sure what they mean. You know, that's a kind of, to me at least, poetry is this intense experience of language. And hopefully I know more about poetry than I did in junior high school and high school, but I've always had this interest, I would suppose. You sure?
Well, I think probably my earliest introduction to poetry came in the music that my father would play in our home. He was fond of some of the great singer-songwriters like Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and Paul Simon, and those songwriters and their lyrics, I think, are a kind of poetry, and that kind of segued into reading poetry itself. Interestingly, I think that it might be in my DNA. I have 3 siblings, and 2 of them are poets, published poets. My brother is here tonight, Baruch, November. And I have only one sister that's not a poet. She's a black sheep because she's a social worker. So my grandmother wrote poetry. So I think it was something that was in our blood, DNA, we kind of sensed that was something that's we just gravitated towards. I think that I really started to take myself seriously as a poet probably in high school. And I think that in poetry, I saw a possibility to express myself in a way that I couldn't in spoken word. I had a teacher named Liz Rosenberg, and she said that she would never have been a writer if she could adequately express herself in speech. So there's certain things that the written word can convey, I think, that the spoken word perhaps cannot. And that's the power of, I think, poetry. That's one thing that drew me to poetry, is a kind of a means of communication, to be able to distill the essence of experience, to able to share and express myself to somebody in a very kind of compacted way that would immediately translate into a kind of important communication. And then in college, I think it went to the next level when I got support from some of my teachers, my professors were very supportive, and that helped me to actually take myself seriously as a writer.
Nice. Nice. Good. Thanks for the background. Well, so David, you want to start with the next piece?
Like another poem? Is that?
Yeah.
Is that...
Rabbi, excuse me, I have a quick question. David, could you just share about your background? That Tattoo was a very touchy poem, and I was just wondering, Rabbi Zalman, I don't mean to throw it off, but I just wonder what kind of background Rabbi Kaplan has.
Right. So first, I should make clear in that poem, the speaker sees someone else having a tattoo. As Yeshua mentioned, under traditional Judaism, things of tattoos is being forbidden. So partly what I liked about that poem, and also when I used to live in Columbus, Ohio, there was a guy who walked around with a huge tattoo with Bereshis, and I was struck by the speaker never would actually get a tattoo, but is kind of imagining having what it would be like. So I grew up in a traditional conservative Jewish home. So in terms of, we keep kosher at home, we would eat out but avoid certain things. Both my parents and my brother were president of the conservative shul that I went to in my hometown. And as I went along, I became more interested in Orthodox Judaism.
They actually he became Orthodox because they wouldn't let him be the president of the synagogue, so he decided
That's
to be
right.
Orthodox.
Because I couldn't get that honored post of show president that brings nothing but happiness into one's life. So, and then at a certain point, I decided I really wanted to learn more about Judaism and engage directly with Jewish texts. So among other things, I went to this yeshiva in Morristown for different stays. And since then, that's the kind of lifestyle that I've been having. So to give you a sense. So just with that poem also, the poem's describing someone who's learning, who's about Teshuvah, who's kind of transitioning. Let me actually, this last year my father passed away, and I found, maybe not so surprising, but surprising at the time, writing a lot of poems about him, about the experience of mourning, about what that was like. So this is a poem called Souls Must Exist. And so one thing you might want to know is that a mourner, when you're in mourning, you switch seats in synagogue. So that's one of the little customs that the poem begins with. So it's titled Souls Must Exist. Because a mourner changes places in synagogue, I move a few seats closer to the window and watch the Atlantic doubling back, like the prayers we repeat, morning, afternoon, and night. Souls must exist, otherwise life would be too hard. After my father died, the two of us alone in the hospice room, I asked him to forgive me for all the times I failed him. I could barely say it, but needed to be heard and forgiven. My mother waiting in the hallway to be driven home. The mirrors not yet covered in sheets. Our pictures on the table. His face, mine, mine, his.
Oh. Yoshua, whenever you're.
Okay, yeah, I'll read another poem. I guess we could pick up on that theme. This is a poem called Upstairs the Eulogy, Downstairs the Rummage Sale. And it's about when I was an undergraduate student in Binghamton, New York, and there was a Yiddish professor who was a real favorite of the students. He revived the Yiddish program. I never actually had him as a professor, but he was a really an admired figure. And in Binghamton, maybe like in some of your communities, is not a very large Jewish community, and they had really one main synagogue in the downtown area of Binghamton, and this Yiddish professor passed away, and they wanted to conduct the funeral in the synagogue, but the problem is that they had already planned several months before. They'd already planned a rummage sale, and that's very important. Of course, there's been months and months of planning. So the problem was that the funeral and the rummage sale ended up coinciding, because out of respect for the deceased, one wants to try to do the burial and the funeral as soon as possible. So it's called Upstairs the Eulogy, Downstairs the Rummage Sale. The beloved Yiddish professor passed away on the same day as the synagogue's rummage sale. And because they could not bear the coffin up the many steps that led to the sanctuary, they left it in the hallway downstairs. And because I was not one of his students, and it didn't matter if I heard the eulogy, they told me to stay downstairs, to watch over the body and recite psalms. And I thought, this is how it is in the life and death of a righteous man. Upstairs in the sanctuary, they speak of you in glowing terms, while down below, your body rests beside old kitchen appliances. And I recited the Psalms as intently as I could over a man I had only met once. And because I knew where he was headed, and you and I were to wed in a few months, I asked that he bring with him a prayer for a good marriage. And this is how it is in the life and death of a righteous man. Strangers pray over the sum of your days. and strangers ask you to haul their heavy requests where you cannot even take your body.
Really, really, really nice. Thank you both, David and Yoshua. Again, I think one of you shared earlier that poetry was something that affected you as a young child. You were just affected by it. I don't know that I could string a couple of sentences together that anyone would want to really ever listen to poetry-wise. But when I have listened to poetry, there's something that absolutely moves you. And so far, this has been a true delight. So let me ask you, growing up and as you moved through your adult life and becoming more of an accomplished poet, who are some of the poets or who are some of your inspirations that has brought you to the point that you're at right now? Yoshua?
As I noted earlier, I was a big fan of the poet and Canadian songwriter Leonard Cohen. And there was a time where I think that I read his poetry almost exclusively. I think my copy even had some Pepto-Bismol spilled on it. So that was like, you know, a cherished poet for me. And more recently, I turned to a very famous Israeli poet who passed away, I think in 2000. His name is Yehuda Amichai, who's one of the more famous contemporary Israeli poets. And I'm also very fond of a Polish poet named Adam Zagajewski. He was born in 1945 in Lvov, Poland, right in the kind of shadows of the Holocaust. He's not a Jewish poet, but he's very interested in Jewish life because of his shared history and because of when he was born. And he's interested in kind of transcendence and infinity. So I find his work very compelling. And I think also what ends up happening as you go through your schooling, you study under other poets, and those poets become like your mentors, and you end up reading their work. One of the teachers that I had, her name is Maria Gillen. She's an Italian, she's a daughter of Italian immigrants. So I think that my work is influenced by her and other poets, a poet Liz Rosenberg in Binghamton, and poets that I studied in graduate school. So it's a kind of almost like an apprenticeship, which is a kind of nice way to pass down the tradition.
It's interesting listening to Yoshua talk because it's a couple things struck me. You mentioned how you have several members in your family of poets. I'm the only one in my family who has, I think, ever read a line of poetry willingly past high school. But my parents, seeing they had a child interest in poetry, would go to poetry readings, including my father, who, you know, had no interest. In fact, I remember when I got my PhD in English, my parents came down for the celebration, and they went and asked all my friends, "What do your parents do for a living?" And one of them said, "My father's a professor." I said, "Of what?" They said, "Musicology." My mother said, "Oh, that makes sense," meaning it makes no sense that we gave birth to a poet, but it makes sense that you're an artist. Also, my experience of poetry is a little different in the sense that very early on, I read the poet named T.S. Eliot, who was a great poet of the 20th century, one of the great critics of the 20th century. He also, though, there's an argument about whether his poetry is anti-Semitic or not. I tend to think it is. He certainly has some lines, he certainly has some attitudes that were not enlightened about Jews. And so for me, part of my challenge, I think, as a poet and as a scholar of poetry, is finding a place for myself in a tradition, in a literary tradition that I see as being, influenced by the ideas of its time, many of which would be hostile to me. So if I look back at some of the poets whose work I really admired, it's a kind of sad fact that some of them wouldn't enjoy my presence. And I'm not sure if I'd enjoy their presence, but I enjoy their poetry. But their poetry gives me a kind of a complicated relationship. At the same time, what Yoshua said has been my experience too. When you go through, if you're studying poetry as an undergrad or as a graduate student in creative writing, you study with individual poets who are mentors, who are, helpful to you. And one of those poets is a poet named Donald Justice, and his poetry has been very meaningful to me. But again, partly my experience of poetry is writing in an English language tradition that I think is somewhat hostile. Well, is hostile to my concerns. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think finding your way in an environment that maybe resists what you want, I hope at least, leads to interesting results.
Nice. Thank you both so much for sharing. It's nice to hear not only the poetry, but a little bit of the background of what goes into each each piece as well, each poem as well. Because we know that just like art, poetry, or a song singer, anyone that's a writer of any kind, you're putting all of your life experience into it. So each one of these questions get to understand a little bit behind each poem that you share. So Yoshua, do you want to start with another piece, and then David, you'll go right after him?
Okay, sure. Actually, I'll read a piece, kind of newer piece that's not in any of my books. And I was asked to do a kind of project where contemporary writers, poets, writers of nonfiction and fiction are presented with an image from the Holocaust, and then they're supposed to write their response, their like literary response to that image. So, and there's a book coming out that, you know, that has all those responses. So this is the image that I was provided. You might have seen it. It's a famous image. It was in the New York Times even. And the image dates back to 1932 in the city of Kiel, Germany. And it was taken by, this picture was taken by the chief rabbi of Kiel's wife. Her name was Rachel, and her husband's name was Akiva Posner. And they took the picture on the 8th night of Hanukkah. And of course, the interesting thing about the picture is that the interior is the menorah on the 8th night of Hanukkah with all the candles. But then across the street is a bureaucratic German building where a swastika is hanging. So I was given that image. I'll show it to you again. And I was asked to write a poem about that image. So this is what I came up with. It's called Hanukkah, Kiel, Germany. On the sill of the Posner family apartment, what else but a menorah? And since this is late 1932, the window opens to a view of what else but a Nazi flag hanging from the town hall's gray stones on the opposite side of the street. Akiva, his wife Rachel, their 3 children, Gita, Shulamit, Avram Chaim, absent from the photograph Rachel has snapped. When darkness arrives, they will step into the flame to kindle the flames. The candle's symbolism almost too obvious. The juxtaposition to the swastika almost cliche. But this isn't literature. This isn't speculation. That a Jew walks down streets, cooks dinner, reads the paper, sends letters, is remarkable, given she is a member of an eternal people. And here is the 8-branched mitzvah object on the 8th night, the precise physical proportions, the blessings, governed by finite rabbinic rules to draw the infinite God into this shoebox of a world like soul into body. And note the couple's names. The husband's that of the famous martyr, whose flesh Romans comb from his body. The wife, that of the martyr's wife, who spent 24 years of her marriage alone so he could study the secrets stored in the crowns of letters floating like ash from the scrolls Roman officers set aflame. This is 1932. In 4 months, on the night following the boycott, Akiva Posner will risk his life to provide Jewish burial for the body of a young man who'd returned home for a visit, shot as he crossed the threshold of his parents' store. And the word for world, olam, is rooted in the word helem, which means the concealment of God. and the number 8 is one higher than nature, one beyond the world created in 7 days. But we still have not found out what 6 million means.
Wow.
I should have mentioned earlier in that poem, an interesting kind of detail is that this rabbi's name was Akiva, and his wife's name was Rachel. And that, of course, reminded me of the famous Talmudic couple, Rabbi Akiva, one of the great sages of the Talmud, and his wife also, her name was Rachel as well. So it kind of triggered a connection between this more contemporary couple from 1932 and this very famed Talmudic couple.
Yeah. She took the picture. What did she write on the back of that picture?
She wrote something about like Judaism will live forever, something to that effect.
Yeah. We'll always stay on top or something of that nature.
Yeah.
All right. Yasher Koach, Yoshua, that was absolutely moving. All right, David.
As I mentioned, some of the poems in this book are set in a yeshiva, and I was struck there by the intensity of prayer. So normally when you go to shul in the morning, at least someone like me, you kind of go in, you're praying, sometimes you've got other things on your mind, you might pray more quickly and more distractedly. When yeshiva, beforehand you're learning and you're preparing yourself for this. The book also follows someone who's struggling with yeshiva life and trying to learn with the language and the study skills. So I think these are the two elements of it. It's called Only the Hebrew. And again, to me, it's trying to capture the experience of the intensity of prayer. Only the Hebrew. The sudden quiet of a room emptied of noise. Only the Hebrew, a stone on his tongue. The boy who carried his suitcase up the stairs swayed as if into a thought. What is holy? No walls of Jerusalem stone, no microphone discreetly clipped across a lapel to announce when to stand. The more you need them, the more words demand. Windowsills honored with books, pictures of the righteous watching. And then, if you don't mind, I want to read one more poem because my friend Aryeh Schonstein is here. And this is a poem that I wrote for his son's bris, which was years ago. And I liked writing an occasional poem for occasion, and out of friendship. And I'm not sure how many poems there are about a bris. So this is titled Bris Milah. It's from Nachum Mendel Schneerson, and it's picking up on his namesake. So, Bris Milah. Across Eastern Parkway, the camera recognized his walk, neither absent-minded nor harried. Alone, he did not run his hand along a neighbor's brick wall. Only the maple's top branches acknowledged spring, holding it like a secret. A taxi sped downtown. How little is seen, a fedora's crown pinched on both sides, the brim bent down, an ordinary black overcoat and beard. This is what covenant means. Each night he carries home a briefcase, no more than a brown paper sack, stuffed with names to pray for. Menachem Mendel, may you learn your namesake's walk.
Nice. These are really cool. David, Yoshua, this is beautiful. You're pumping life into all of us. So as we were going along memory lane, you shared a little bit about your love for poetry and who inspired you. It's a really good question that actually that Aryeh Schottenstein shared, which fits perfectly into the time of, I guess, where we are right now in your story and journey. So as you both had made changes in your life and where you're sitting now, a more observant, more an orthodox perspective, was there a change in your writing? Was there a transition that you had to make? And did it require to think differently about poetry? David, you want to answer first?
Sure. I think in some ways, you have to take more, at least I had to take a little more seriously the truth or falsity of what I was saying. So in other words, if you take a poetry class, what you'll say is, something happens in your life and you can kind of play around with it in a poem because it works better. Say we're walking down the street and you say something interesting to me. I think that'd make an interesting poem. I might not have you say it. I might have someone else say it. I might not have him say in the street. I might have him say in a cafe, right? But I think when you start writing poems out of religious belief, maybe it loses a little bit of that playfulness. And then I think you have to be a little more careful about what you're saying and what it means. What it means you have to take a little more seriously. So there's an argument among poets and among critics as to how open-ended poetry should be. In other words, if someone reads a poem of mine and they read it very differently than I wrote it, should that bother me? Well, in some cases it doesn't, because if they gain pleasure from my poem, that's great. But if I'm arguing something halachically or something, about a figure from the Bible, or it would be disturbing if they're reading it in a way different than I want it to be read, that I might find objectionable. So I think when, at least for me, if you write out of a religious belief, you get another set of responsibilities that I think you have to contend with when you write. At the same time, I think it obviously gives you a lot of opportunities. So for me, the theme really of a lot of my work is kind of grappling with this faith and how it works on a day-to-day, how it works in a day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. Sure. What do you think?
I think that I remember when I was in graduate school and I was writing poems rooted in Jewish experience and Jewish literature. And at that time, I was studying under a very famous poet who passed away recently. His name is Tony Hoagland. And I remember he said to me that I'm fortunate, maybe more fortunate than my peers, because I have a deep tradition to write out of. And they're kind of adrift. They don't really have any kind of pool of wisdom to dip into. They're not really rooted deeply in a tradition, and therefore, they don't have that resource, which was an interesting thing to me. But I think that it's interesting to look at how I viewed literature previously to being more involved in Jewish life. I think actually that when I was younger, I did grow up in a traditional kind of framework, but I kind of always resisted it. And I felt like a rabbi maybe is someone who just doesn't have a sense of humor and is afraid of dogs, and and somebody who just only is thinking of the afterlife. And the here and now is really something that you should just forego so that you could learn Talmud, and in that way you'll gain a better position in the afterlife. So in that way, the Judaism that I was kind of presented when I was younger was one that was divorced from the here and now, and divorced from my experience as a person, who I am. And I think therefore I turned towards literature and poetry because that was a way to kind of express myself and to explore who I was and who I wanted it to be in a very real way, in a very kind of tangible way. Whereas Judaism to me at that point in my life was, just studying Talmud so that you could get to the afterlife. And that I think was just one kind of Judaism that was being presented to me at that stage in my life. And then interestingly, when I was in graduate school, I kind of got turned off by literature and literary culture. There was like a lot of elitism and pretentiousness I felt. And I kind of actually steered away from literature at that point. And that's when I actually went to yeshiva in Morristown. And I really thought actually that I would never write again. And I didn't even really care if I would write again. I determined that I wanted to move away from that life, from the life of secular academia. And I felt that was a false life. And I totally immersed in yeshiva and in learning Hasidic thought. And I think, to speak to the question, it was actually hard to start writing again because I felt like I'm studying texts that tell us the secrets of the universe. So what can I really say? Or what can I really add? These are definitive truths as I saw them. and what can I really add to the picture then? And there was a point in my life where I kind of had to decide what I wanted to do, if I wanted to become a rabbi, or I want to go back to what I had been doing before. And very interestingly, my mentor, my rabbi, said that I probably should go back and try to write poetry and try to be a professor. And he said, for one thing, you might meet people that a rabbi would never meet, and you'll be in a classroom with people that would never talk to a rabbi, and perhaps you'll have a positive influence in that way. But also, just he said that God gave you this ability, and maybe it would be wrong of you to just ignore it and to walk away from it. And the irony was, I think that at that moment, Judaism became much larger than I had assumed it was, because now Judaism could encompass both literature and religious life and ritual, and combine the two, and they weren't really at odds anymore. So in that way, for the rabbi for my mentor to tell me that poetry is part of my Jewish journey, kind of wed the personality and the mysticism and the ritual all together, and made for a much larger Judaism than I had understood as a younger person.
It's actually, listening to Yeshua, there's two things that I thought of that I would like to add. I think also what Judaism teaches you is how each moment is charged with meaning and opportunity. With each moment, you can accomplish something incredible. Each moment is a decision between doing something that you should be doing, not doing something. I think that's a powerful model for literature. Also, I would say, when Yeshua was talking about literary culture, I think one thing that happens too is that Judaism at least taught me that literature and literary culture aren't the same thing, and that there's literary culture and there's literature, and you shouldn't confuse the two. Whereas when you're going through graduate programs and you're involved in literary culture, you tend to think of those things as being one and the same. You have to be like this, this, or this to write literature. Because at the end of the day, to write literature, you have to just write literature. And I think that I think was helpful for me.
Yeah. And Yeshua, I love how you put it. And David, you added also, is that using your talent as your vehicle to connect with a God and express your Yiddishkeit is exactly what Chassidus is all about. To not that the world is not at odds with our talents. The world is not at odds necessarily with the secular world. There's always a way to bring a little bit of godliness. I think even one of your poems shared the idea of bringing a little bit of godliness into the shoebox, right?
The shoebox of the world.
Exactly. All right. So, David, would you like to share another piece with us? And then Yeshua, you'll go after him.
Sure. Maybe I'll just start with the title. I'll read the title poem of this book, which is "Into My Garden," which is, many people know, Basi Lagani, which is a Hasidic discourse by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. So this poem is trying to capture what it's like coming into yeshiva for the first time. So the students are learning in the annual cycle of learning this discourse. The speaker, again, is like me and not like me. I studied with, in graduate school, one of the people I studied with was a philosopher named Richard Rorty. So if I'm among other English professors, I would say I studied with Richard Rorty and everyone would be very impressed, even though I wasn't a very good student of Richard Rorty. And so in this poem, and he always would say, metaphysics is dead. Basically, he's a secular philosopher. So, but he was the closest person I saw in grad student to being a kind of a Rebbe-like figure. He had his little acolytes. So in this poem, it's coming into yeshiva, into this environment, and contrasting it to the education I received while getting a PhD at the University of Virginia. So it's titled "Into My Garden." As if New Jersey were Babylon, an Argentine and an Israeli argue in Aramaic, styrofoam cups of instant coffee warm in their hands. Other boys return to last night's commentary. I have come into my garden. Back and forth they sing like an invitation. What did I learn in school? Whenever the philosopher lectured on the death of metaphysics, pollen found an open window. pistil and stamen crazed with each other. Yellow the serpentine walls and columns. Yellow the library where church belonged. Some nights his best student recited the lecture like a pledge, but nothing changed. Not the picture between us, the glass slick with our fingerprints, the envy I felt. Boys dressed like men raced the stairwell, as if to the singing, as if to hear what my garden means. 7 generations caused God to withdraw. 7 generations drew him back. All those years of talking, what did I learn? Again, at the end, I wanted it to be an open question. I'm kind of thinking about how secular and religious education overlap and come into some tension a little bit.
Okay, this is a poem called Self-Portrait. It's the last poem in my book, and actually David Kaplan helped me. He made some good suggestions to improve the poem. So thanks, David. All right. Anyway, it's good to, as a poet, to have a friend that's a poet. You could share poems, and he could tell you what's wrong. Okay, so this is called Self-Portrait. Between 1 and 5 children have crawled into your bed at undetermined hours throughout the night. You rise and head to the kitchen in darkness. Press the coffee button, wash your hands with the ritual cup, say the morning blessings, drive off in a modern silver car. Before morning prayers with an accountant, you study the Hasidic text that claims God's concealment in this world is not real, but more like a lofty idea enclosed in a parable for a simple audience. God is present just the same within the finite world. After prayers, a truck with spiked wheels drifts into your lane and you forget what you learned the previous hour. Envision your children growing up without you, wife marrying another man. In a basement office with no windows, a student, tarantula tattoo climbing down his forearm, hands you a poem about the things his girlfriend did with his friend on spring vacation and asks for suggestions because he is a deep believer. You forget you wear a Hasidic beard. Think of yourself still as a young man in a college cafeteria trying to get the dark-haired stranger a table away to look back at you. In the silver car once more, you listen to a recorded lecture that claims God's unseeable essence is most present in this lowly realm. You notice the absence of your E-ZPass tag as you near the bridge. Reach under your seat, consider a million possible stories of concealment. Find it in the glove compartment, just as you enter the toll booth. The lecture goes on in the background. In this world, God is just hiding from himself. On the Bay Parkway, Hasidic men walk along the water with their wives. The sky is orange and red. You think of your own wife cutting cucumbers for your lunch. You should thank her, stop off and buy something, but you'd be late. The elevator is broken again in the building the Jewish Night College rents from the high school. Out of breath, you enter the classroom, walls covered with pictures of Spanish teachers in sombreros, to teach poetry to seminary students in long dark skirts. They are not sure what to make of you or their lives. But when you discuss the famous poem about a father who rises early each morning to heat the frozen house, one begins to cry. This morning, the discourse said, everything in this world mirrors and stems from its spiritual source above, like signifier linking back to signified. What does the race through the streets to beat the men to the bridge where they work all night represent? You park the car, walk up the dark pathway to your front door. There is light in one window. Thanks.
Very, very nice. Thank you guys again, both. I know that you were promised a time slot here that we're going to end by, which gives us about 4 or 5 minutes left. I do want to ask you guys how, again, if you have a moment to do a closing poem, that would be really beautiful. But before we do that, if you could also answer the question on how can our community members and our community as a whole support your work, support your poetry?
Well, I guess the best way would be to try to get a hold of our books and read it, see what you think, and try to spread the word. The poetry is one of the least read of all forms of literature, I would say. So poets are always looking for a larger audience. So
Get the word out.
I just embarrassed David. I'm sorry. So yeah,
Are your books sold on Amazon or where?
Yeah, you could get them on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Nice.
I'd agree. It's the least read, but also maybe the works most by word of mouth. So if you enjoy it, check it out more and tell your friends if you enjoy it.
Aryeh, if you're still on, could you find the link and please post the link for people who are on this chat to be able to purchase the books? If you can find links to both David and Yoshua's books. Aryeh, are you still on? Please post the link. Thank you.
Or just say the names of the book and then people will just search.
Yeah, if you just go on Amazon and you search our names, you should be able to find books.
And a link is even faster. All right. So, and yes, so Yoshua and David, if you each have a closing poem that you'd want to share, then we'll close it out right after that.
David, you want to go first?
Okay, so why don't I close with a poem about leaving the yeshiva and about thinking about re-entering into life outside and how to take those lessons with you. It's called After, and it is an epigraph by the Alter Rebbe, which is "We must live with the times," which is the famous line, which puzzled his Hasidim, who realized it meant you're supposed to live with the week's Torah portion and the days of the Torah portion. So the question about this poem is how, going from this intense experience, and you go out into a world in which you don't have all this time to study, how can you bring the lessons with you? So again, the poem is titled After. Each morning I skim the books they study, a few minutes to remember that anger is idolatry and world means concealment. But when someone slaps the lectern and the prayers start, I try not to think of what comes after. Sunlight angling against the cars, angling against each other. In the study hall, an hour to prepare, an hour to ask, live with the times, what does that mean? To make my flight, I prayed early as if the room were empty. Walls of books I had not read. The teacher adding a question to yesterday's answer.
Okay. This is a poem called One of the Few Jews, which I wrote really about my high school math teacher. One of the few Jews. One of the few Jews on the R&B scene. He played keyboard for the Marcells of 1961 Blue Moon fame until a voice called him back to the God of his forefathers in the middle of a nightclub solo. Drifting from job to job, he taught algebra in the Jewish day school, tapping his black loafers beneath the teacher's desk. And on the Sabbath, he sat in the front of the synagogue, praying the silent prayer longer than the other men, asking forgiveness for his former life on the road. And because he was a kind-hearted man who pitied the slower students, his voice would rise, obvious to whom? When the others complained, he had reviewed the equation one too many times. And before the holidays, when only a few students would attend, he'd pull out a red book he kept in his desk and read to us the story from the Talmud of the highway robber who transformed his life and married a great sage's sister. Once, as he turned his back to leave the school building and walk home, I slipped the peel of a banana he had just given me into the opening of his worn leather briefcase. And because I was in 10th grade and he was my teacher, the universe of the small rented attic, where he opened his bag to see how his kindness had been repaid, did not exist for me. Its absence reinforced the next day when he said nothing in class. After I graduated, I heard that he had married one of 2 blind twins from his hometown who also played the piano. Then, suddenly, he disappeared without a word. No one in the community ever heard from him again. Oh, Mr. Males, can it be that a soul descends into a body, asked to fulfill a mission it cannot complete? This world is cruelest to the best people. Please come back, Mr. Males. Your wife is silently waiting before the piano in the foyer. Your seat is empty in the front of the shul, and you were the only one in the whole synagogue who knew how to pray.
Wow, that was incredible. Each and every one of these poems have been fantastic. They touched a part of my soul, and I'm sure the souls of everyone here. But in a unique way, it's also touched a part of my mind. Very, very special. Thank you so much for doing this. There's a tradition that I grew up with as a young child in Camp Gan, Israel, where it always completed learning classes or learning sessions with the words, "Learning never ends, learning never ends." And so while we formally conclude this evening's presentation, we ask of those of you who would like to stay on, including our presenters, if you so choose, we will open up the mics of everyone who would like to chat, and we'll just have a fireside chit chat where someone has a quick question or a quick comment, no long monologues. If you have something quick that you want to ask, end it with a question mark, quick that you want to say, and present it to the presenter so they can respond, or present it to the audience that people can respond. Please go ahead and do so. But before we go to that, I'd like to ask each and every one of you to please go on to Amazon, purchase the books of our wonderful presenters. We're doing this out of the goodness of their heart, and we're eternally grateful for them, for their time. And please put your hands together for David and Yehoshua. Thank you for a phenomenal evening. Thank you so much. There have been several questions that have come in. For those of you who are ready to call it a night, we understand it's late. And for those of you who'd like to call it a night, please go ahead and do so. But for those of you who'd like to stick around, the mic, it's open mic night. Just go on and share something that's on your mind. If you'd like to share something, if you'd like to ask something, but make it quick, sweet, and to the point so the conversation can roll.
Everyone's muted. Maybe unmute if you want to.
Unmute yourself if you want to say something. Just unmute yourself.
Hey guys, this is Elon.
Elon, you got to go on video. Elon, you got to go on video. We want to see your pretty face.
Okay. All right. Okay. Here I am.
Hey, Elon.
Hey guys, thank you so much for beautiful poetry. Just incredible. So for both of you, I posit the question, what's your favorite piece of literature or poetry, most inspirational piece of literature or poetry that you've ever come across? What inspired you? Yeah, just the top for each of you.
I don't think I could answer that. I don't know. David, could you have an answer to that question?
I can tell you not what the top is, but what my personal favorites are. In other words, what the poems that have kind of meant the most for me over time. And T.S. Eliot really has been meant the most. I mean, there's other poems I love that rise and fall, but I think his poetry I find the most compelling. Even when, as I say, sometimes I'm taken aback by it.
I guess there is one poem that I really feel kind of like accomplishes or embodies what I see maybe as one of poetry's central ambitions, which is kind of to celebrate the ordinary. And that's a poem by a poet named Marie Howe. It's a famous contemporary poet called What the Living Do. And it just kind of celebrates these very ordinary experiences. It talks about like heater being broken, and these dishes are in the sink, and the drain is clogged. And it's really a poem that she wrote to her brother who had passed away. And she kind of is surprised and celebrates just ordinary life, and realizes how valuable it is, especially given the backdrop of her brother's passing.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much.
Can I jump in with a question?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much to all the rabbis, Rabbi Zalman, Rabbi Perlstein, Rabbi Cohen, and a huge thank you to Yeshua and Rabbi David. That was really out of this world. I guess my question is, and thank you for answering my previous question, are you surprised by the reception of your Jewish-themed poetry in the secular world, or first, what has the reception been like?
David?
Yeah, I think we have to do to understand how
Aryeh,
poetry-
we'd love to see your face. We'd love to see your beautiful face.
I think there's an important distinction that, poetry readers, mainly those I mean by academics, scholars, critics, make, is between something they call spiritual and religious. So spiritual poetry that thinks that there might be a God, tries to yearn for the God, that's welcome. But poetry that's religious, that belongs to a set of religious beliefs, that kind of makes everyone nervous. I'm always struck that when I give poetry readings, who connects with it and who doesn't. Often I find, oddly enough, my readings is a few African-American women of a certain generation who are dressed as if they're going to church. And afterwards, they often thank me, and they kind of connect with the religious poetry in that way. A couple years ago, I taught at Haifa University in Israel, and my class was almost all were women, majority were Muslim women. And when I was so struck when I taught, there was a class on contemporary American poetry, and I taught among others Yeshua's poetry, and they liked his poetry the most. His poetry spoke to them.
Good taste.
And they particularly appreciated that you were talking about poetry of kind of married life, of living out a religious commitment. The women were either married or going to be married soon, and they had a fairly traditional lifestyle. So I find sometimes it's surprising who is attracted to your work and who isn't. But I think in an academic setting, one tension is always of a poet writing out of a particular religion is that religious poetry, in contrast to that kind of spiritual poetry, which is much more common.
And sometimes, interestingly, you find that non-Jewish presses that are totally secular might be more open to your work than, let's say, like a secular Jewish press. So it's a kind of surprise, surprise in a way. But I think that to whatever extent our work has been received, I think is kind of, in my experience, the way that I think of it, is kind of like a testament to a teaching that one of my teachers would often quote, which is that it said that the universal is in the particular, which means that which touches everybody, that which is moving and real for the many, is often when you talk about your particular experience with all of its particular flavor, with all of its idiosyncrasies, that seems to represent a real life that's lived, and that could resonate. So even though, like David's saying, maybe even though it's my particular Jewish experience, there's some kind of real life parallels or just some kind of authenticity that's another reader could see once you get into the particulars of in the really mundane daily kind of details of your life. Somehow that could kind of cross the culture barrier or the religious barrier.
Amazing.
There is a question that somebody asked in the comments. I know that you may have touched on it a little bit. Mendel Rosenberg asked a question. If you're still on, maybe you could ask it in person. If he's not, I'll ask it. How do you feel about Israel? How do you feel Israel is represented in today's poetry circles? I know you mentioned a little about anti-Semitic or not, but that's his question about Israel. Israel. Who wants to answer that?
David, you want to take?
I like how any question you find a hard one, you're like, David, why don't you stop?
David, this question's
Easy
really up
one,
your
you're
alley.
like,
This is
I'll
right up
just
your
go
alley,
with my
David.
answer. You
This
know,
is really tailor-made for you.
so Israel poetry, it's a complicated matter. So you also have Israel, you have Israel poetry being written in Hebrew, Israel poetry being written in English. There's a kind of a fairly vibrant English language poetry scene. How it's received in America, partly you have, among American academics in the humanities, they all typically have a certain view of Israel, which is hostile to its present government and kind of hostile to its general place in Middle Eastern studies, the Middle East. At the same time, Israeli poets tend to be far to the left. So it strikes me that it's not that they're running into anti-Semitism so much as it's a small country in the other side of the world, and just the average American reader of poetry doesn't have it on his or her mind. Amichai actually is a very popular poet among Americans, partly because he's a brilliant poet, but partly also his poetry translates well. And also ideologically, it's not so challenging. Israeli poets, in my experience with them, again, typically their politics line up with the politics of American poets, but there's not really, it's like asking American poets, what do they think of like poets from Peru? Well, they typically don't have much knowledge of it, I would say. Except for like Amichai, I would say is an exception.
Does Amichai do English or Hebrew?
In English, oh yeah, in English. He's been widely translated, like I think Robert Alton translated and others. So.
Very cool. Anybody else have a question?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
I have a short poem from my late friend Frank here to read for you guys. It's a good poem to read for people also, for everyone, but for people especially who write, who write poetry and songs. All right, you ready?
Ready.
It's called Evelyn, a Modified Dog. Evelyn, a modified dog, viewed the quivering fringe of a special doily, draped across the piano with some surprise. In the darkened room where the chairs dismayed and the horrible curtains muffled the rain, she could hardly believe her eyes. A curious breeze, a garlic breath, which sounded like a snore, somewhere near the Steinway or even from within, had caused a doily fringe to waft and tremble in the gloom. Evelyn, a dog having undergone further modification, pondered the significance of short person behavior in pedal-depressed panchromatic resonance and other highly ambient domains. Arf, she said.
Nice ending.
Wow, thank you. Does anybody have a question? Stephen, Ben, Fred, Elon already asked, Miriam, Karen, Hannah, Noam, Nathan, all the way from St. George, Utah.
Can I say something in Hebrew?
Ma?
I can say something in Hebrew.
Ashu bivrit,
They speak Hebrew, ask. I don't know, help
Okay.
you.
No, I will say something. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
אוקיי. הפרח היפה שראיתי בחיי, הפרח היפה שכה נקשר אליי. מה זה דמדומים? מה לי הם אומרים? הנה מסביב, בא כבר האביב. הציפור קורא והדרור עונה, אין עוד עננים, גשם מורידים. תלוי איך מסתכלים ואיך גם מבינים. This until this.
Nice.
Metsuyan.
Ah,
Metsuyan.
thank you. By the way, Rabbi Zalman, on my falafel cart, I put a mezuzah.
Nice.
Good, good. Is that by the door? Oh, good. You see, now it's protected. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I hope so far it's going good.
Good.
Okay, bye. Good to see you. Bye.
I want to just say thank you so much for David Cap and Yeshua November. This was a beautiful, beautiful event, very inspirational, and so nice for you to take the time and do it. I'd like to remind everybody, please make sure to buy the books. It's a great opportunity. And thank you again. And it was beautiful to see different communities get together in unity and in harmony. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Good night.
All right. Have a great
Good
night.
night.
Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you and good night. Bye, Rabbi Zalman.
Bye. All right.